Evil resides within the celluloid of this film. This was what televangelist Billy Graham said of the original Exorcist. He believed the movie to be so evil that an actual demon lived within the film reels. This completely ludicrous statement would go on to have an influence on the 2012 horror film Sinister. Major spoilers coming up, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, I highly recommend that you do before you go any further. The idea of Sinister came from a nightmare. Writer C. Robert Cargill had watched the remake of The Ring, and that evening he had dreamt about finding an old film reel in his attic of 4 people being hung. Cargill happened to meet director Scott Derrickson in Las Vegas and told him the story of his nightmare. They took what the televangelist said and mixed it with the boogeyman to create the mysterious Bagul, a being that lives on the fringes of our world and feeds off our fears. However, he wasn't a demon, but a pagan deity, and was written as an updated version of the boogeyman. They then fleshed the idea out into a pitch, and a week later had a meeting with producer Jason Blum, the CEO of Blumhouse Productions. Blumhouse is known mostly for producing smaller budget horror films like Insidious, Oculus, and The Lords of Salem. Blum liked the idea, so Derrickson and Cargill went off to write the script. They wanted to make a movie about fear. Not the cat jumping out of the closet or loud noise startle scare, but genuine fear. They worked tirelessly and wrote the script in 5 weeks. Blumhouse greenlit the film with a $3 million budget. The concept was that a true crime author, Ellison Oswalt, was living in the home of a murdered family and trying to solve the crime for his next book. While in the house, he discovers these odd Super 8 films, each of which shows a gruesome murder. By watching the films, he unleashes the devilish entity, Bagul. Cargill got the name of Ellison Oswalt by combining 2 people he admired, sci-fi author Harlan Ellison and stand-up comedian Patton Oswalt. After going over the actors to cast in the lead, they decided on Ethan Hawke. Derrickson asked if they could get a meeting with him, and Blum assured him that that wouldn't be a problem, since he and Hawke were old friends. They met with Hawke, but he wasn't sold on the idea since he didn't like horror films. They told him the movie was going to be different because he wouldn't be acting the way that you would in a traditional horror film. After some convincing, he signed on. Because of the small budget, they knew they'd have to do this film on location and not on a set. They found a home in Long Beach, New York that was perfect because it looked like Pennsylvania, which was where the film took place. Many ghost story films have these huge 2-story homes, but for this they wanted to have a unique look with a single-floor ranch-style house with a small attic and no basement. The interior and exterior of the home were all shot on location, but they did have to build a small set in LA for the attic because the real attic in the house was too small for a film crew. The director wanted the look of the film to be dark, so he had most of it lit from single sources. He was inspired by the 1971 film Klute, which is known for its use of black space. The movie was heavily influenced by 70s cinema, like The Shining, Blowout, and an unusual one, Devil Times 5. Devil Times 5 was about a group of kids that escaped from a mental institution and murdered a house full of adults. While writing the script, Derrickson told Cargill he had to watch Devil Times 5. The look of the Super 8 film was inspired by the 1979 Tarkovsky film, Stalker. They shot the Super 8 footage first, over the course of 2 days, in Los Angeles, with the exception of the hanging scene, which was shot in the backyard of the house in New York. To open the film, the first scene was Cargill's nightmare, the hanging. This scene was the most expensive one to film. That wasn't a real tree in the backyard. The effects team built the tree for the scene and anchored it into the ground with concrete. The family hanging is all stunt people. When they shot the scene the first time, the stunt coordinator messed up and nearly hung one of them. He was immediately fired and they brought in another coordinator who did the scene safely. One night Derrickson was watching a documentary on black metal. He was intrigued by how bizarre the musicians were and based the look of Bagul on black metal corpse paint. The scenes with Trevor having night terrors were directly taken from Derrickson's own life. His son suffered from them and he thought it would be a great addition to the film. Ethan Hawke was friends with Vincent D'Onofrio and got him to play the part of Professor Jonas as a favor. He did his scenes in one day in another part of the house. While working on Deputy So-and-so, they didn't want to fall into the trap of making Deputy Dewey, so they kept the character smart, just a little starstruck by Oswalt. The deputy actually outsmarted Oswalt because in the end, he was the one that figured out what was going on. Since they shot all the Super 8 footage first, when Hawke was watching them, he was seeing them for the first time, and his reactions were genuine. The scene where the killer was walking upstairs was an homage to one of Derrickson and Cargill's favorite movies, Manhunter. They didn't have a name for the film yet, but while working on the scene where the kid lights his family on fire, he looks at the camera and smiles. One of the grips said, "Oh, that's so sinister," and they liked it so much, they went with it. There was next to no CGI in the movie. Almost everything was done in camera. For example, the pool party scene, there were stuntmen and women tied to the chairs that were pulled into the pool. Another person was underwater with oxygen, in case anything went wrong. Nick King, who played Bagul, stood at the bottom of the pool with weights holding him down. They shot the entire scene in less than an hour. The scene with the kids chasing Oswald through the house was done with a motion control camera. They shot the entire scene with the kids at a higher frame rate. Then the camera mimics the shot movements exactly, so they were able to do the scene again with Hawk at normal speed. They blended the film, and that's how they got the kids to appear to be moving slowly, while Hawk moved at normal speed. The giant house at the end was actually a real estate office. The glowing poison was just the chemical inside of glow sticks. The scorpion, snake, and dog are all physical manifestations of Bagul messing with Oswald. You can see the forms in the images Professor Jones sent. The music played a huge part in making the film stand out. The combination of Christopher Young's haunting score, mixed with the bizarre songs played during the Super 8 footage, gives the film a beautiful yet eerie presence. They finished filming after shooting 2 days of the Super 8 footage, and 21 on the main location. When they screened the film for a focus group, something unusual happened. Of the 20 participants, all 20 of them liked the film. For the first screening, the executives from the studio showed up. Once they saw the audience liked the film, they tuned out. Some of them checked their phones, and others just got up and left. This is very disheartening. They weren't interested in hearing what the audience liked. They only wanted to know what they disliked. For the next focus group, the executives didn't even show up, which ended up being a good thing. This group was looking for things to nitpick, which were easily explained if you paid attention to the film. One asked why it was raining in one scene when you could see that it started raining in the establishing shot. Another wanted to know why Oswald was walking around the house in the dark rather than turning on a light. They had seemed to miss the part where the power went out. The laptop didn't shut off because it switched to battery power. After a few minutes of this, they realized it was a waste of time and didn't hear any more. From the initial meeting in Las Vegas all the way to the film being released into theaters was less than a year. When looking for US distribution, no big studios wanted anything to do with the film. They insisted that an R-rated horror film that was this bleak and it revolved around kids killing their families could never be a commercial success. Thankfully, they were proven wrong. Despite the small budget and small ad campaign, the film went on to make $77 million versus its $3 million budget. After its success, they greenlit a sequel, which should be out by the time you see this. If the sequel's a hit, Blumhouse will definitely have a franchise on their hands. Sinister works as a great horror film because it relies on genuine tension and not so much on boo scares. Sure, there are a few in the film, but as the director said, he wanted to earn them. He set things up to make the audience uncomfortable instead of just startling them for 90 minutes. The characters in a horror film are what make it good, which is something that a lot of modern horror, especially the Platinum Dunes remakes, don't realize. If you care about the characters, that makes it infinitely scarier than just watching a bunch of assholes get picked off one by one. They also kept the film intentionally claustrophobic. Oswald almost never leaves the house, which helped to ramp up the uneasiness. They did shoot some scenes where he meets one of the neighbors who tells him about the family before their murder. They decided to cut it from the film because the additional information wasn't necessary, and it took the focus away from Oswald's obsession. The film was full of hints that become clearer on a second viewing. While watching the Super 8 footage, and it's handheld, the killer is filming. When it's on a tripod, the missing kid's in frame, meaning that the kids were the killers. Also, the families are listed by their sibling names, and mom and dad, as an homage to Blade Runner, as well as a hint. Cargill had Ashley paint unicorns on her wall. This was to show that she was one of them. When Oswald first watches the film, he doesn't see Bagul. After he sees the second film, he calls the police, but then changes his mind because he wants to use the film to solve the crimes himself and regain his fame. This is what dooms him and his family. Now that he's invited this evil into his house, Bagul manipulates himself inside the footage. The sheriff even lays out the entire film in the beginning. The missing girl is dead, you won't like what you'll find, and some things just can't be explained. As I said in a previous video, a large part of effective horror is knowing what to show and what not to show. Many people remember the film as being full of gore, but really most of it happens off screen or we see a reflection of it in Oswald's glasses. The lawnmower scene especially, that terrified people, and you barely see anything at all except for his reaction. For this type of film, it makes the scenes way more effective. When you overload a film with jumps and shocks, simply for getting a rise out of the audience, it may work with the first watch, but not so much on the second. The right atmosphere is imperative towards making a horror film scary beyond its first viewing. This is hands down one of the best horror films in the past decade. No forced scares, no comedic relief, no happy ending. My only gripe with the film is the jump scare ending. It felt disingenuous towards everything that had happened before it. After doing some digging, I found out, not surprisingly, that the studio insisted they have a jump scare at the end. Originally it was going to be a push-in on the home movies box, and then a smash cut to black. After seeing it, the studio suggested they do a pull-out, and then the Bagul jump scare. The director didn't have to put it in, the studio didn't force him, but he agreed with them because it helped to lighten the tension at the end of the film. The last 10 minutes of the film were brutal, and having that jump cut the uneasiness that the audience was feeling. While it was the director's decision, I greatly disagree with it. The jump felt so out of place after a film that had done nothing but provide legitimate fear. It would be like ending The Shawshank Redemption on a fart joke. In my opinion, it just didn't belong. It didn't ruin the preceding experience, it just tarnished it slightly. The beauty of this film is that it isn't your traditional horror movie. It's a crime drama that inadvertently steps into a paranormal horror film. We definitely need more horror movies like this, and less like this. Although oddly enough, Blumhouse produced both. Genuine fear, not jump scares, are what divide horror classics from the movies that scare the shit out of your 12-year-old cousin.
Don't worry, Daddy. I'll make you famous again.
Bagul!